It's a typical Tuesday morning. The alarm goes off for the third time, so you know you really have to get up now. You've already gone past your one allotted snooze. You're behind. You get up in a rush. You go shower, clean yourself up, and rush out the door to work. The workday is filled with the usual hustle and bustle of emails and calls and clients. But at least you managed to get away on your lunch break to jet over to the SDC and work out. That was nice. But now it's 5 o'clock, and you've got to go pick up child number 1 from hockey practice. When your spouse calls, where are you? You forgot that today was the day you were supposed to meet with the contractor to continue that discussion about the project you're working on at the house. And so you hang up and you make a quick call to a friend to secure a ride for your child, and you speed toward the house where your spouse is waiting for you. You arrive late to the discussion, and the spouse gives you the look, which raises your blood pressure, which doesn't help that you also skipped dinner to make it to this, right? You had planned to pick up your kid and go through the drive-thru, which was quickly becoming kind of the family dinner table. And when all is said and done, when you get past the conversation and past putting kids to bed, you crash down on the bed, head on the pillow, and you scroll through your phone. Your one other time of escape for that day. Now, is that a typical Tuesday? Maybe that's a dramatization of a typical Tuesday, but I am curious, does any of that sound familiar? We lead busy lives. And you don't have to have kids to have a busy life. In our country, in our culture, we're busy with all sorts of things. We're busy with work. 429 million vacation days are left on the table every year. We're busy with our hobbies. We got softball on Tuesday and basketball on Wednesday and pickleball on Thursday. We don't want to miss out on any of them, right? We have FOMO. We want to maximize our time. We're busy with our gadgets. I was reading some data, a survey recently of people 18 years and older around the world. For those of us 18 years and older, we spend 8.5 hours per day on screens. The top 2 areas, 4.5 hours on TV, another 2.5 on our phones. And the data shows that this amount is increasing with each subsequent generation. One piece of good news, America is not even in the top 15 country-wise, which initially was like, wow, I was proud of it. I was like glad for us until I realized how much we still use our screens. So it's really not so much good news for us as it is bad news around the world. This is a global issue. All the countries of the world that are first world, that have devices and screens, struggle with this problem. But what is all of this busyness leading to? Do you feel like you're actually maximizing your life? That you're taking advantage of every opportunity? Or do you feel scattered? Do you have a hard time sitting in silence without your phone? Are you able to do that? Can you soak in a moment, just appreciate the beauty around you? Do you feel like you're taking advantage of your time, or do you feel like you're coming apart? The disciples in our text could relate. Our text this morning from the Gospel of Mark paints the picture of crowds pressing in around Jesus and his disciples. We heard of an attempt to create some boundaries, but a failed attempt. It was kind of 2 steps forward, 3 steps backwards. Life ever feel like that for you? The disciples had just returned from a rigorous missional training event. Jesus had sent them 2 by 2 into the surrounding areas to preach the gospel, to build up and establish relationships, to even heal the sick and cast out demons. That sounds exhausting. And so you can almost see the look on their faces as they return to Jesus to give him the report. You see the lines creased across their eyes, their eyelids drooping from the lack of sleep. They're haggard and disheveled from that dusty Palestinian journey. And yet there's a light in their eyes and in their smiles as they rapidly report to Jesus all they had heard and seen. But Jesus, as he's taking it in, he sees these people need rest. He sees the disciples coming apart. And so that's what he says to them. He says, "Come ye yourselves apart to a desert place." Come apart. That's the old King James version of this text. Come apart. Break away from all of the busyness. And come be filled, be satisfied, be refreshed with me. In me. Find peace. And that is the basis for what the Sabbath is. What do you know about that word, Sabbath? What does the Sabbath mean? For many of you, likely, your minds are transported back to Mount Sinai, right? With Moses giving the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. And we count it as number 3 in our tradition. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. But what does that mean? For some of you, maybe you interpret that as go to church every Sunday, or else. Or maybe it's been explained to you in this way. You cannot do any work on Sunday, or else. But what is the Sabbath, really? The Sabbath is an invitation to rest. That's what that word Sabbath means, Shabbat in the Hebrew. It means literally rest, cease and desist, stop doing stuff. It's an invitation to stop striving physically and spiritually. It's an invitation to stop applying that pressure on ourselves that we so often do, that little voice that says, if we don't perform enough, if we don't produce enough, if we don't push ourselves enough, then everything's going to fall apart. It's a reminder to ourselves that the world is not actually on our shoulders. But more than just an invitation, the Sabbath is a reality that's woven into this creation. That's what we heard in Genesis chapter 2. It's actually woven into who you are and who I am. We are wired for work. We're wired to be productive, to get stuff done, to cross things off our checklists. And that feels so good, doesn't it, when you get to finally take things off those checklists? But we are wired that way only up to a point, to the time in which we need to rest. There comes a time where if we don't rest, it will actually negatively impact our work. It'll also negatively impact our family life, our relationships. It will negatively impact our spiritual life. And how do we know this is built into the fabric of the world? Well, we heard it again in Genesis 2. The Creator God rested. After he completed his 6 days of creative work, on that 7th day, the Almighty, the all-powerful Creator God rested. He rested. And so there at the origin of creation, the origin of the world, we have the basis for what we now call a weekend, for time off of work. Genesis said, God blessed the 7th day and made it holy. What a God we have, who blesses not only our work, but also blesses our rest. But it's hard to keep that 7th day set apart, holy, distinct in its rest, right? It's hard to do that in life. Look at what happens in the story of Mark. It says they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves, finally, a break. But many saw them going and recognized them. And they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And isn't that always the case with these needful things in life when it comes to the demands of this life? They're always ahead of us. They're always encroaching on us. They're ready to pour themselves into our bucket. We actually have a literal bucket at our house right now. It's under our kitchen sink. We've been having some plumbing issues. If I've mentioned this before in a sermon, it's the same issue. It just happened again. And it's okay. We take out the P-trap underneath, the piping in the sink. So when we use the sink, we can still use the sink. The water just flows into that bucket. And that's fine, as long as I remember to empty the bucket, right? Especially when the dishwasher's running. It's a practice, right? Emptying that bucket. And when I do, the bucket comes back and it's refreshed. It's ready to take on more. It works. The Sabbath is like that bucket. It's like that practice of dumping it out. It is a practice. You have to do something by not doing something, right? That's how the Sabbath works. It doesn't happen automatically. We're not naturally predisposed to do it for ourselves. We have to be thoughtful about it. But when we do that, when we Sabbath, we empty out, we pour out all of those demands. We give ourselves a day to rest, to put up a boundary, to put up a wall and say, no, this is enough. We will not stop the encroachment of life's demands upon us. They will keep on coming. And it is so easy to say yes to more than we can take on, to overextend ourselves until our buckets are pouring out, are overflowing. Have you ever found yourself saying, there just aren't enough hours in the day? That's not true. That's the whole point. There are enough hours in the day. Who gave us 24 hours? God did. And He won't give you more than you can handle or more than you can accomplish in a single day or a single week without the rest you need. If you feel like there aren't enough hours in the day, then someone else, not God, has given you more than you can accomplish. Maybe you gave yourself more than you can accomplish. But God won't do that to you. That's why He gave you the Sabbath. And so what is the Sabbath practically? The Sabbath is literally one day a week which God gave His people to rest from their work, just as He did. That's how Exodus chapter 20 talks about it. One of the two places you'll find the Ten Commandments. They'll say, rest because God rested. But this rest is not just a cessation from work. It's not just doing nothing. It's a chance to do what God did, to enjoy creation, to enjoy the fruits of your labors, to enjoy God Himself, and to call ourselves into remembrance of the kind of God we have, the one who really has the world on His shoulders. The Pastor Aaron already alluded to it. Psalm 121, it says this, I lift my eyes up to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from Yahweh, who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. God rested on that seventh day in that first week of creation to set a path for us, to mold us in a particular way. We are built for that day of rest. But God's not resting. God's not taking off. God is watching over you, always, constantly. He's not slumbering. He's not sleeping. He is taking care of you. And that's a help, because I know it seems impractical to think that taking a day off of my work is actually going to somehow help me manage all the things in my life. It seems counterintuitive. But we're not alone. Look at how the story in Mark ends. The crowds have surrounded Jesus and his disciples, and the burden of it is starting to make the disciples come apart. Send them away, they asked Jesus. But watch Jesus. He has compassion on the people, on the disciples, and also those weary crowds gathered before him. And so he feeds the 5,000. He takes the little bit that humanity has and he turns it into enough. It doesn't seem possible, but he does it. And then he makes the disciples get in the boat, go across the sea, while he dismisses the crowd. And then watch what he does next. After he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. What is Jesus doing? He's doing the very thing that he had wanted for the disciples, that he had instructed the disciples to do. He's coming apart. He's taking a break from the busyness to be refreshed and satisfied in God himself, in his Father. It is the secret for how Jesus was able to handle all of the busyness of his earthly ministry. Have you ever noticed that in the Gospels? Jesus is a busy guy. The crowds are constantly flocking to him, or someone finds out, hey, Jesus is here. And he's like, please don't tell anyone. And they're like, got it. And then they tell everyone. And then the crowds come. You can finish Mark 6. Go read it. As soon as they get across that lake, the very same thing happens. Crowds are coming again, surrounding Jesus. How does he remain the Prince of Peace? How does he remain gentle and compassionate and thoughtful of others? He Sabbaths. He rests in God, his Father. That's the practice that he implemented in his own life to keep him continually aware, actually, of his freedom. That's a weird way to put it, but Deuteronomy chapter 5, the other place that mentions the Ten Commandments, connects this commandment to our freedom. Because anyone who cannot rest from work is a slave. You're a slave to the need for success. Or you're a slave to this materialistic culture that tells you you need to have this much to be happy or to be secure, to have peace. You might be a slave just to a tyrannical employer. That's possible. But you see, the Sabbath is this declaration of freedom. It's a pushback against these slave drivers in our life. But not only from the external, the physical work, but of the internal. The constant need our human hearts have to justify ourselves. To know that we're enough because we've done enough. See, in the Sabbath, in this rest time, God comes to you and he says, you are enough. Not because you've done everything perfectly, but because what I have done for you. You don't need to prove yourself to me. You don't need to prove yourself to other people. You don't need to look at what you've accomplished for the proof of your worth. You have it in me. I say so, and therefore it is. So how do we practice this Sabbath? How do we inject that into our hearts and our lives? Well, be practical. Practice it. Take a look at your calendar. If you're not using a calendar, think about using a calendar, right? Do a time audit, right? That's just a fancy way of saying, look at how you spend your time and where. Take a look. How am I spending my time? In what areas? And then budget your time. Time is like money. It's a finite resource, but it's yours. And you can choose to use it how you desire. But as you do that, if you do that, pay attention to what it tells you. If time is like money, it's a resource. It's something that has value. We spend our time on the things that we value. What does your calendar say you value? Jesus says, where our treasure is, there our hearts will be also. Use it as a heart check. When it comes to technology, yes, it's a challenge, but it's also a tool. There are tons of apps out there to help you if screen time is something you actually want to work on. If you budget your time or do a time audit and see, I'm spending way too much time on screens, look up these apps. Look up a screen usage app. They will help you create that boundary. Block out the incessant influx of technology that just invades our life if we don't put up barricades. It'll help from that bucket overflowing and becoming a mess. And finally, just remember that Sabbath isn't just a cessation from work, but it's about resting in God. It's about knowing you're enough because of what He speaks to you. So listen to Him. If you budget your time, if you calendarize your time, make time to hear from your Father. Do what Jesus did. 15 minutes a day. Small amount of time. Isaiah 26:3 says, "You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you." Sabbath is the practice not only of blocking out external physical work, but creating space for our minds to be stayed on Him. Hear from your Father, rest in Him and in the freedom He has won for you through His Son Jesus, who is our peace and our rest. Amen. I invite you to stand as we continue our worship by confessing our faith in the words of